Oh, hello, hello. That's good. Hello.
We just
Excellent.
we just moved into a new place, so we have
Ooh,
a
well done.
bookshelf with no books in it. But I put up some old chant stuff up there for
I can
you.
see something behind you. That looks
um,
appropriate.
so I think most everyone will know who you are, at least the people that'll be listening to this. But do you want to just say a little bit about yourself and what you've been doing your whole life?
Okay. Okay, I'm Patrick Craig. I'm a countertenor. I started singing when I was 8 years old in Lichfield Cathedral as a little chorister. And I ended up at Cambridge University as an organ scholar. And then I mutated into a singer and went to the Royal College of Music in London. And within a few years of leaving there, I got a job at St Paul's Cathedral, singing in the choir there, where I've been now for 23 years as a countertenor vicar choral, we're called. We
Mm-hmm.
sing in the cathedral choir every day. And within a couple of years of that, I did my first concert with the Tallis Scholars,
Mm-hmm.
and that was December 1996. And 20 years later, I did my last concert with the Tallis Scholars, number 1024.
Wow. Wow.
And I sang for a few other groups in between, but that's sort of my main bit of work, really.
So when did you decide to sing alto or countertenor?
Ah, well, this is a good story.
Yes.
So, when I was a teenager, my voice didn't break very easily. It didn't really break at all, obviously. So I thought my voice hadn't broken, and I carried on speaking in falsetto till I was 22,
Wow.
which I do not recommend as a way of becoming a countertenor. But it meant that I sang for the whole of my teenage years at the same pitch that I spoke, and it's 2 octaves higher than what you're hearing now.
so
And it wasn't
up
until
to
I was at
20
university,
so up to 22 you were speaking in like
yeah,
you were
in
speaking up here.
falsetto, yeah, that kind of pitch, yeah.
Wow.
And that's just what I thought my voice was. I didn't think I had any other option. And then while I was at university, I met a speech therapist because I was worried about my voice, obviously at the age of 22, who told me that I could start speaking like this any day I felt like it. And I didn't realize that. So I decided to delay it a little bit. I went through the whole of university speaking 2 octaves higher than this, and then when I left, I decided to change it before I came to London, and I started like this. But the good thing about that was that it meant that the countertenor range for me was always quite a familiar part of the voice to use to sing. That's the only part of the voice I've really used to sing. So there was a little advantage to that rather scary story.
Right. Uh, what was it like learning how to speak not in your countertenor voice?
That was quite an interesting process. I went for 2 weeks of intensive speech therapy in Addenbrooke's Hospital, which is an amazing hospital in Cambridge. And every day I would go in and they'd make me say things in the new voice. Find the new voice. It was sort of there once it was sort of, I realized where it was. But I did it, a lot of it by pitch. A lot of the work I did was by pitch. So she had this amazing machine that showed me the pitch that I was speaking, and I was able to use my sense of pitch, of perfect pitch,
Yeah.
to see when the 2 octave range that I was speaking in, and that sort of helped me. And to begin with, I went very low, and my friend who was with me said, "Oh, you sound, sort of like some famous bass singer or something with a crazy low voice," and it was a bit much. So I was then able to, over the 2 weeks, decide what my speaking voice would be like, which is quite an unusual thing you get to
Yeah.
do. And
It just
I
took
sort
2 weeks.
of, um, not completely to get completely used to it, but part of that 2 weeks was sort of going into shops and you getting used to using my voice, ringing my parents in the new voice, and sort of little tasks that I had to do when I wasn't in the speech therapy, sort of learning how to use the new voice. Yeah,
Wow.
it was
That's
pretty quick though. It was pretty quick. Yeah.
wow. Um. Now, so you do you ever sing in your speaking range ever?
Well, that's another interesting question because Peter Phillips in the Tallis Scholars
Yeah.
a couple of years ago said, Patrick, the alto parts that you sing in the Tallis Scholars are very low, and I think that you should try and use your baritone voice more for the low notes. And I'd never done that. I'd always carried on going down in falsetto, and I felt that was a more joined up voice. That was my singing voice. So I then began to explore baritone voice, and now these days I do use a little bit
Okay.
of vital moments, and but and in St Paul's as well. There's just certain times when it makes more sense to do that, and it's not quite as bad as I thought in terms of the distance
Yeah.
between the voices because I'm quite a low bass in my speaking voice, I think. So
Yeah.
I think I'm not an easy transition between the two, but it's better than I thought. So I do use it a bit.
Yeah, that's cool. Do you feel like you have like a kind of a sudden gear shift when you engage that lower, or do you feel like you've been kind of able to mix it?
No, I'm not really a mixer. No, I've got to make
Okay.
a decision
This.
to. This is it now. Off we go. We're in the baritone now. So no, I'm no great magic blender.
Okay.
I think the best countertenor voices for me are the ones that are natural tenors, and that they can then shift between on a much sort of smoother basis. But with
Yes.
me, it's a much lower voice, so it's either on or off.
Yeah. So do you get vocally tired?
One of the great things about singing with the Tallis Scholars for 20 years is the stamina build up, the sort of the knowledge that you have about how to survive vocally, what taking in what you have to do, and pacing yourself. And I don't get vocally tired very easily. Um, I think I get vocally sort of switched off a bit. If I go on holiday for a long time, I find it quite hard to get the voice back up and running afterwards.
Mm-hmm.
But in terms of hard work singing and doing a lot of singing, I do feel I've built up quite a good level of stamina. Certainly for a countertenor, it's just a slightly more fragile voice. And I think just because of the nature of the work we do at Tallis Scholars with the travel and the workload,
Yeah.
I don't have a lot of problems with stamina.
Yeah, that's really. I find that one of the most impressive things that you guys have to do is
Yeah,
just crank out concert after concert and just sing
get on a
many
plane.
hours. Yeah, and
Yeah,
it must be brutal on the voice. But I'd like to get into touring as a singer in a little bit. Do you mentioned perfect pitch? Is that something you have? I didn't know that.
I don't call it perfect pitch. I call it relative pitch. I'm
Oh,
pretty
okay.
aware of where I am pitch-wise all the time,
Yeah.
and that makes sight reading modern music and stuff like that a little bit easier for me. I think I read by pitch.
Uh huh. Uh huh.
I'm not very good at intervals. If you gave me some advanced oral tests to do and said sing a seventh, that's not really the way I read music. I read music by pitch,
Interesting.
and I wouldn't put money on myself to always get every note right. So when people try and test me on this,
Hmm.
I don't call myself 100% reliable, but I'm pretty aware all the time of where I am pitch-wise, and I think that's it's just a very different way of singing, and it means that when we transpose pieces or I'm singing at baroque pitch, I'm having constantly to reread the music,
Yeah.
so I have to transpose it in my
Wow.
sight in order to sing it, which is a bit annoying, really. So it has advantages and disadvantages.
So you've been given the task to give the opening notes for Tallis Scholars. How did you get that job?
Yeah, I was handed that job on day one because Robert Jones before me, the countertenor before me, had given the notes. And I remember going to my singing teacher, Ashley Stafford, who had sung a lot with the Tallis Scholars as well, quite soon after I started in Tallis Scholars, and said, "I just think I need to have a bit of help with this. It's quite a big pressure vocally
Mm-hmm.
to create these like perfect notes at the beginning of everything and not, have anything wrong with the voice." And he said it was ridiculous that the countertenor does that. The tenor has a much bigger range.
Mm.
The tenors should give the notes. It shouldn't be a countertenor job. He was very like angry about the fact that this had landed on the countertenor. But I sort of embraced it, and I sort of went with it, and I experimented with it quite a lot at the beginning in terms of how I would give the note. I know that some people think that notes should be hummed and not sung.
Interesting.
But I'm all about making the note as clear as possible and distinct as possible. So what I used to do was to give the note on the vowel that I was about to start the piece as a vocal preparation for what I was.
Uh-huh.
So if my first vowel was an R vowel, I would give the note on an R vowel. And so the concert would be quite interesting note-wise because every note would be a different vowel. And people found it fascinating. I then decided that my oo vowels and my e vowels are my best vowels, and so I decided that I would give every note on an oo vowel, and that's what I've done ever since. And that didn't take that long to settle down, but it's been quite a fun process. And because I've sort of got a bit of a reputation for doing that job quite well,
Yeah.
I now do it for St Paul's Cathedral Choir and the Cardinals' Music. So the number of notes that I've given over the years for all those groups is now rather enormous.
Wow. You've given it. I used to do a little bit of that for the Tudor choir when I was singing alto, and you've given it way more thought than I have. Was that your fault? Well, Sarah Sharif showed up on the C, and I said, "Well, you probably should have her do it."
There you go.
There's no this negotiating. If you've got to give a middle C, that could be,
I try and avoid too low notes. I put it up the octave if I need to. I'm quite ruthless about what octave I'm going to sing in. It's going to be my choice.
So when do you go up?
I lost some high notes, and I started giving notes an octave lower than I normally did. So I just do what I need to do to make the best possible sound.
Do you take the C up a octave?
For the Pet Magnificat, which starts with the sopranos on an octave above, I always try to aim to do that at their pitch because I think that makes that stuff much easier for them.
Yeah.
But most of the time I would do the lower C. Yeah.
That's really
It's
good.
so nerdy. I love it.
Yeah, that's good. What groups are you singing for now?
So the main job is still St Paul's Cathedral, where we do evensong every day and 3 services on a Sunday. So that's where I've been today. And I'm still a regular member of the Cardinals' Music, who did a concert in Smith Square the week before you came. So we don't do as many concerts as Tallis Scholars, but we are a regular recording group. We've just done a new SPEM disc on Hyperion, finishing our complete Tallis, Latin Tallis. So that's 7 discs. With Cardinals' Music, having done 13 discs of William Byrd beforehand, which has been sort of my major recording thing that I've done in my career, which is the whole of Byrd and the whole of Tallis.
So, do you do any courses too? Are you on the? Yeah.
Yeah, more and more conducting amateur courses. Yeah, for different organisations. One called Laycock Singers. Which does courses in Europe, sort of week-long in a nice place, building up to a concert at the end of the week, complete scratch choir. I'm working this year for another organisation called Run by Singers, which is a similar sort of thing. And then I do one-day type workshops for various organisations in England and stuff where I go off and prepare a themed day of singing and scratch people up together. I conduct an all-female choir which does evensongs in cathedrals. And we meet on the day and prepare the music during the day and then sing a service at the end of the day. So there's lots of different little bits and bobs like that I'm doing now, conducting wise, which I've built up over the last few years.
Nice. So is that a lot of that stuff happening just in Europe?
Mostly in Europe, yes. I haven't done any of that on my own out and about. Over the years, I've done a lot of Tallis Scholar courses in America, as you know, and Australia. But no, most of the stuff I'm doing is in Europe.
Okay. Well, maybe after this, you can give me some links if people want to, look into courses you'll be at. I remember my first one in Oakham when you were there. I think 2000.
Yeah, I remember.
Me and Oren were there. We were a rowdy couple.
Yeah. What year do you think that was?
I think 2000 or 2001. We went both years, I think. and
Right.
uh,
I was
yeah,
there.
I think maybe you were there the second time because I think Ghislaine was there when I was
Right.
the first time.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
but
I did courses with Elaine as well, though. So yeah, we had a bit of
oh,
overlap.
cool,
Yeah.
good, good. So you've sung many concerts on tour, and that's probably not so. Tallis Scholars were hitting, over 1,000. But do you tour with other groups too?
I used to do quite a lot before Tallis Scholars really took off for me. I did touring with Polyphony Choir, which is Stephen Layton in England. A bit with the Gabrielli Consort, a little bit with the
Mm-hmm.
16. Um, who else have I been abroad with? Well, with St Paul's, obviously, we've done some big tours. But most of my touring's been with Tallis Scholars. I think that's, the vast majority of my foreign singing has been with Tallis Scholars.
So, what is the hardest thing about touring so much?
Worry about getting ill.
Yeah.
It's just if the voice is working, um, and you've got reasonably nice circumstances that you're living in, if the hotel is reasonably nice and the flights are not awful that you're going via Timbuktu to get to John O'Groats down the road,
Yeah.
it's fine. But if the voice is not, if you're not entirely well and the voice isn't working as you would want it to work, that's when touring gets hard. And that for me is the sort of prime aim, is to just keep the machine working.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, have you? I mean, I assume you've gotten sick. You're just like any singer. What have you done to prepare yourself for a concert when you're sick?
Oh, that's mainly not panic too much.
Yeah.
It's more of a mental battle,
Yeah.
really. Um, Steaming, all that kind of stuff.
When you get sick,
Being careful.
does your voice what happens to your voice when you get sick? Does it shrink in range or
It varies, depends what kind of sick it is. I had a weird one last December where I just lost my top notes, and I'm usually quite easy with my high notes, and just a little ceiling came on my voice where I couldn't get above a sort of A natural. It was very
yeah.
strange. So it just varies depending on the illness, but usually it just means it goes very low, and producing the falsetto, getting the chords to join up is a problem. It's that kind of weight of gunk on the chords. That's the worst kind of illness for
Yeah.
me. If I can keep gunk in my head
Yeah.
and not let it sort of drop onto the voice, then I'm okay.
I imagine I try to think about how long I would last touring, and I'm away for a week or 2 weeks, and I'm like, okay, well, I think I'm good. I think I'm good now. And then having to sing while while you're on this trip would be because you can't just party too hard. You have to you have to
No.
behave yourself, and you do this on a much larger scale. You have many concerts, and you're doing a lot of the same programs. I think probably with some variation a little bit. Do you ever so I do you ever mentally get sick of the music, singing the same thing over and over again?
Yeah, no, I'm really lucky with
Yeah.
that in that I stumbled across a repertoire that I really
Mm-hmm.
love. So I didn't know about Renaissance music much before I joined the Tallis Scholars. I learnt on the job, and it just suits me, that music. I admire it, and the quality of the 200 years of music that the Tallis Scholars does is incredibly
Yeah.
consistent. And Peter is very good at sort of varying the program, so we don't simply do the same program for a whole year. We're constantly restarting with a new program. So for a tour, we will do the same program over and
Yeah.
over again. But I actually enjoy that because we do so many different programs. I like repeating a program because I feel it gets better and better the more that we know it, because we're not great at
Yeah.
rehearsing. We don't do a lot of rehearsals. So if we're on a tour, that is the only time that we repeat
Mm-hmm.
music consistently, if you see what I mean. I mean, obviously we sing Allegri Miserere a lot, and that's not the most thrilling piece to do over and over again because it's very
Yeah.
repetitive. But even that, there's something about that piece and the way that it speaks to an audience, and watching an audience react to Amy Howarth, Jan Coxwell, Deborah Roberts singing the top C moment, for me makes that an interesting piece. And I quite like having a bit of time off because you've got two
Yeah.
choirs, and that's quite rare in a solo concert that you can actually stop
Yeah.
singing. So even that piece, which is the piece I've sung most often, I didn't ever really get bored of it. There were members of the group who would just get a little bit angry that we were doing the Allegri again. And for me, I thankfully in my 1,024 gigs, I never got to that point where I was like, I don't want to do
Yeah.
this. And for no piece was that the case. So I'm really, even the modern stuff as well. So things like Arvo Pärt, which for a long time we did that quite often, different pieces of Arvo Pärt. I just thought this is quality music. I don't mind singing
Yeah.
this again. Um, it's good stuff. Peter's quite selective about what he does, and I've been really lucky because I know that some groups, if I was in, I don't know, the King's Singers or something, and I was having to sing I'm a Train for the 700th time, it might just wind me up a little bit. But the quality of the music that I've sung repeatedly has been really
Yeah.
good.
Good. Good. Um, y'all get along when you tour?
Yeah, it's part of
Uh
the
huh.
job. There's an awareness that the best work comes out of the best
Yeah.
atmosphere. But Peter is quite a good judge of people, and so are my other employers. Andrew Carwood's a very good judge of character, and I seem to find that I work with really nice
Yeah.
people. A lot of them are my best friends. A lot of them are the people that I socialize with when I'm not
Yeah.
singing. So again, that hasn't been a problem for me. I've never had somebody I'm in the group with that I just wish I wasn't touring with or wasn't
Yeah.
there. So um, it's been remarkably easy going on that point, and I think there is an element of it needs to be
Yeah.
like that because if you use it together, you're going out on stage together. I know that some groups operate in a way that they just ignore each other for the rest of the time and just have to be apart, but I've always been the opposite. I'm a team player. I want it to be a happy atmosphere. I want people to go out on stage together in a good frame of mind, and that for me gets the best
Yeah.
music.
I've never been in a group where that toured so much, and I just mentally imagine that having a good relationship with your peers would be especially important in those while touring.
Yeah.
Um,
And I think if people do cause ripples on tour, those people don't continue to
yeah.
tour. I think the people that stick around are the ones that make the situation a better
Yeah.
situation. So, you might have a period where there's someone who's a bit problematic, but it doesn't last because they don't get booked.
How do you get yourself on the current time zone? Do you just are you sleeping when you're supposed to?
I forced myself into it straight away. Yeah, I'm not one of these people that tries to stay in English time and ignore where I am. It can be very difficult, but I try and force myself, hopefully with a long first day, and then get really tired and then sleep at the right time the first
Yeah.
night. If I can do that, the second night is the hardest night, but at least then I'm on some kind of routine. I try and force it straight away.
Good. Good.
It's quite
Yeah.
hard.
So let's switch gears away from touring and talk about uh, how you think the interest level is in Renaissance polyphony right now. Do you think the interest has grown? Do you think it's you know mostly just interest is just over there in Europe? Do you find that U.S. groups have more U.S. groups have taken it on? What's your pulse on the situation?
Oh, I'm not sure. I think it's not changed hugely in the 20 years that I've been doing that repertoire, but it's remained pretty consistent. For instance, the amount of times we go to America with Tallis Scholars has remained pretty consistent. There's been no sort of dips in
Mm-hmm.
interest in what we do. I think there's a constant interest in getting that music in certain environments. We're talking, the
Yeah.
coasts of America, especially those sort of liberally type cities that are up for this kind of thing. In England, I think the 16 have done some amazing work in England, touring the cathedrals of England, doing regular concerts, what they call their pilgrimage that they do every year, where they basically do Renaissance
Mm-hmm.
music. And they change the program year by year, but basically it's the same program for a whole
Yeah.
year. And I think that has shown the consistency of them doing that has shown that there's an interest in that kind of music in
Yeah.
England. But I think it's Tallis Scholars haven't done the majority of their concerts in England. It's not been the easiest environment for us to sing. But we're a well-known group, so we get concerts and they're well
Yeah.
attended. But I wouldn't say it's taken off in the 20 years I've been doing it. It's remained sort of quite
Mm-hmm.
static in a good way. I mean, and the European concerts as well has remained quite static. We go to Japan every other year. That's remained quite regular. Agara-san, the agent there, has done an amazing job keeping that consistent because it's such an alien culture there
Mm-hmm.
in terms of them knowing what we do, but they still love it. There's a real thirst for it
So
there.
does your government?
And
Sorry. Go ahead.
uh, we've gone into China. That's been a more recent thing. Australia sort of dipped. That was a tricky one, but I think it's just remained very consistent. I wouldn't say it's taken off. What I said to Peter and the Tallis Scholars a few years ago was that thought the reputation of the group was so high in terms of the world of Renaissance music that if Peter is going to just do 10 more years, say, as the director of the group, he should aim in the last 10 years to get it into the top concert halls of the world, into the top festivals. We shouldn't be doing little
Yeah.
churches in little nowhere places. We should be just aiming to get this music alongside the symphonies and the choral works that are deemed to be the best
Yeah.
music. And I think that's that the Tallis Scholars could and should try and do
I mean, I
more
think
of
they've done
because
probably.
it's a rare
Yeah, I
thing.
think they've probably though done the best work at getting that stuff on the main
I
stage. I mean, I don't know any other
I
group
agree.
that's.
It's the best
Yeah.
level, but I want the promoters and the big money music people to embrace that and to try and
Yeah.
up that that repertoire into the reputation of, say, a Beethoven or a Mozart or a
Yeah.
Haydn. You know what I mean? That kind of. I don't think we've quite
Yeah.
arrived with Bird and Tallis of saying and Palestrina and
No, I
Victoria
think I agree
of them
completely.
being
Yeah.
where they should
Yeah.
be.
Yeah. How is
And if Tallis Scholars can't do it, I don't know who
yeah.
can.
How is the funding for music over there? Do you are they, when you give a concert, do you get money from the government to help present it, or it's
No.
yeah, okay.
There's nothing. There's no arts. It's called the Arts Council in England that dole out money to arts organisations. No money from the Arts Council goes to Renaissance
Uh-huh.
music. The 16 don't get any. We don't get
Mhm.
any. The Gabrielli consort doesn't get. It just doesn't go there. It goes to big orchestras, big concert halls, big opera companies. The cathedrals don't get any, so they're doing quite a lot of Renaissance
Mhm.
music, and they get no government money
Really?
whatsoever. It's all totally funded, and that's obviously part of the story of why we're not in that upper echelon. It's just not recognised as something worthy of government
So
money.
you said the cathedrals don't get money from the government?
Nothing, not a
Like
penny.
even St. Paul's?
Well, we charge people to come in. That's why we charge so much for people to come in during the day, tourists, because there's no other money. You have to maintain the building and you have to maintain all the music that goes on from
Right.
that money. There is no other money.
So music groups really are surviving on like ticket sales and stuff like that.
Yes, Alice Scholars relies entirely on ticket sales. There is no quite a lot of music groups have charitable side to them. They have foundations which raise money to support what they do.
Uh-huh.
So the 16 do a lot more of that. But Peter in the Tallis Scholars doesn't want to have that sort of influence on his artistic decisions. That's his bottom line.
Yeah.
He doesn't want people telling him what to do musically. So he has managed over the 40 years that he's done that group to never have any other funding than the money made from doing concerts,
This is
which
why
is completely, it's a unique situation.
yeah, this is why so when we were over there, surprising you, we ran into some younger singers that Josh knew, and they were totally under the impression that, oh, you're from America, you just get loads of money from donors and the government, and sort of in comparison to you guys getting, surviving on just what you're really selling, on your value. I can see how they would come to that impression. I mean, we have donors that get a little benefit, when they give us money,
Yeah.
through our nonprofit system. But I don't think you guys have something like that.
No, there's not the same tax benefits to giving to the arts
Yeah.
in this country that there are in America. So there is money given to the arts. And places like the Royal Opera House have massive development departments that raise money for what they do, and even the 16 have a serious amount of that going on. But it's just weird that Tallis Scholars, the group I've sung for, has never really entered into that world at all.
Do you have a best moment in your Tallis Scholar career?
Oh, that's a tricky one. Um, I have quite a few best moments, but I'm not sure I've got one best
Yeah,
moment.
just a
I don't
few.
know. Okay, let's start at the beginning. So the first big tour I did, was it the first big tour? Yeah, the first big tour I did was to Australia. And one of the first concerts I did on that tour was in the Sydney Opera House, singing the Victoria Requiem with Caroline Trevor on maternity leave, about to have Edmund Phillips, who you know now is 19
Yeah.
years old. Um, and so I was the alto that did all the plain chant incipits in the Victoria Requiem, all the opening little bits. I
Wow.
did it all, and that was one of my first gigs, and it was in a packed Sydney Opera House. In that year, the Sydney Opera House and the Melbourne Hamer Hall, which competed for how many people they could get in. So they had different organisations organising the concerts, and they had a competition. So the Sydney Opera House was sold out, and then when we got to Hamer Hall in Melbourne, there were people on the stage in a little circle around us, so that if we reached our hands out, we could touch the audience.
Wow.
It got more people in their hall than Sydney had got in the Sydney Opera House. So it was such a buzzy tour, that, because the audiences were huge, and we were doing Victoria Requiem in every concert, and it just so happened that I was doing all the solo lines.
How many
So that
people
was
were
the
there, you
first.
think?
It was over 3,000 in each one, I think.
Wow.
Yeah, that's similar to what St Paul's capacity is. So another highlight for me was the 40th anniversary concert in St Paul's Cathedral. That was the 40th anniversary of the Tallis Scholars, and I helped to sort of organise that concert a little bit. I just sort of tried to negotiate a little bit with St Paul's about having it there,
Hmm.
and we managed to pretty much sell out St Paul's, and we needed to make it pay, because it cost a lot of money to have it in St Paul's,
Yeah.
and it was a bit of a concert, and we did Speminalium, and we had 40 singers, and that was a big moment. The 25th anniversary of the Tallis Scholars was a good year, because we did this brand new John Tavener piece which needed a narrator,
Uh huh.
and the first time we had Sting
Oh, yes, I heard
narrating
about that.
in the National Gallery in London, and it was in an art gallery, and it was a very dramatic setting, and Sting was there, and we did Fields of Gold with Sting singing solo, and we did backing singers to Sting with Tallis Scholars. That was a very wacky gig. I remember that very well. And then we did that same piece again couple of months later in New York with Paul McCartney as the reader, and
Wow.
that got a much bigger reaction. There were people queuing around the block at St Ignatius Loyola,
Wow.
and there were people holding banners like "Paul, we love you," and it was not a typical Tallis Scholar audience.
Yeah.
And there were loads of celebs backstage that he brought with him. So every time we went off stage, there was like Mia Farrow or somebody else was there backstage. That was one of my favorite gigs.
Wow. What's the largest audience you performed for? You think it's about 3,000?
Have we done any really huge? Yeah, I think that's probably. I think yeah, that's sort of maximum concert hall. Yeah, I think it's about that. Maybe three and a half. Yeah.
I'm constantly sort of don't believe that. Apparently, from what I remember Peter telling me, that you guys have never missed a concert because of a flight issue. You've made all your well,
Yeah.
you've how does that, any close calls?
Yeah, well, Seattle was one. We arrived a couple of hours late for a
Oh yes,
concert
I
in the
was there.
town. Yeah, that was one of the worst ones of my time in terms of lateness and the audience staying. The worst one was in China on our first tour to China, and the plane just died. It was an internal flight going to Guangzhou, which is their sort of second city, and the plane, China Airlines, was just ancient and just didn't work at all. And we just thought we're not going to get there, and we had to change planes, and we were, I think, 3 hours late, certainly
Yeah.
2 hours late, and we were snatched off the plane and straight into the concert hall. And they'd all waited, the entire audience, and that was about 3,000 people, had waited. They'd had
Wow.
a piano recital. Someone had gone out, the audience played the piano, but they were so fascinated by what we do. There was no CDs in China at the
Yeah.
time. They hadn't played it on the radio. It was just like, this is happening. Do you want to come? And 3,000 people came, and they waited 3 hours for us to get there. And we went straight on stage, no rehearsal, did the gig, and they went absolutely berserk. So that's the closest we've got to missing a gig. But apart from that, we always somehow, skin of our teeth, make it.
Are there any? Do people in China and these in Japan, do they have courses also? Are they interested in Renaissance polyphony that much?
Peter goes out and judges competitions in Japan, and when we first went to China, it was really hard to get a visa to go. It was more than 10 years ago now, and it was quite hard to get in. So the way we got in was to enter a competition.
Uh huh.
So our first performance ever in China was as part of a competition. They didn't really tell us, the singers, that that was what was going on. We just
Oh.
went on stage, sang the Allegro Miserere, came off, and the next day we ended up in this big hall for an awards ceremony where they're announcing the winners. And we didn't win the competition.
Uh huh.
Somebody from Korea won the competition, and we then got given a consolation prize because they heard we were quite famous,
Uh huh.
and they gave us this consolation prize, which was very bizarre.
That's so
But
weird.
that was sort of the way. So I think that's more the way that they try and emulate this kind of music through competitions and stuff like that. I'm not sure they have courses. Maybe they do. I don't
Yeah.
know. But they have choirs that do this kind of music and try and do it the way that we do it, and it's quite interesting that.
Yeah. I'm under the impression that, at least from what I've heard from Peter, that you have a consistent you consistently get hired to go sing, over there in Japan and other Asian countries.
Especially, yeah, yeah,
Um, have you? I think you've been to the
Korea.
Philippines. Have you been to the Philippines? Have you sung there?
No, I don't think I
Okay.
have. That might have been before
Yeah.
me.
Yeah.
No, I've done Korea,
Yeah.
Japan, China, yeah,
Yeah. Cool.
Hong Kong, Singapore.
Yeah. So I want to switch gears a little bit and pick your ear about the CD industry.
Yeah,
We, uh, that me and Josh do a lot of recording, and
yes.
we feel that's very much what you do when you're performing. Nice to have a product to sell to your fans.
Mm,
Um,
right, right.
a lot of us have been worried about this problem that you basically never make that money back. Um,
Yeah.
and it's just feeling like a huge marketing cost. Um, have you thought about this? And what are your thoughts about, you're still in groups that's still committed to doing CDs. Do you feel like you're maybe not going to actually sell physical CDs but just have digital sales? Um, I don't know. How do you feel that's going over there?
I think I've lived under a little bit of a rock with this one for a while, but I've definitely seen over my 20-year career, this is the biggest shift in what I've seen of the world that I sing in. So when I joined the Tallis Scholars, I didn't make a recording for 8 years because they had so many discs already in the can
Yeah.
that they were waiting to release, that they couldn't make any more discs because it was at the top of the market and they were flooding the market with recordings, and it was already done and it was ready to go. So that was where I started,
Mm-hmm.
and then the Cardinals Music, which is the group that I've recorded with most, was making regular CDs for first ASV and then Hyperion, and it seemed to be rolling along very nicely.
Mm-hmm.
But I feel in the last few years that the whole thing has sort of ground to a bit of a halt. The
Yeah.
sales have dropped enormously. The whole download thing has sort of made people reassess. And I myself have my own group, which is an all-female group, which I've wanted to record with for the last 20 years, and I just haven't got round to it because I find this whole thing so stressful. I want to pay my singers properly. How do I justify spending the amount of money I need to spend to do it?
Yeah.
I'm going to do it. I need to do it. I'm now going to have time to do it. But it just seems like we've got to a situation where the whole thing of selling CDs is just not really what it's about. It's about having, as you say, having this marketing tool and
Yeah.
sort of building the library as well. Andrew Carwood very much got into his head that he wanted to make his mark with recording by doing a bulk of things. So the entire William Byrd, the entire Thomas Tallis.
Yeah.
Um, so it's like that sort of a record for posterity. It's
Yeah.
not really, oh, people want to buy this. They want to have another Speminalium disc. It's more kind of, um, I think this needs to be recorded. And that's certainly how I feel with my women's choir, that a lot of the repertoire that we do, sacred music for upper voices, has not been recorded with professional
Yeah.
choirs. So I feel very strongly that I need to get on that horse, but it's not a horse that I personally have ridden. I've just managed to do a lot of recording without having to organize it. So I haven't quite lived in the world that you've lived, where you're trying to make the thing and sell the thing,
Yeah.
and I need to get into that world a bit, and it's quite scary because it's not the world that I entered 20 years ago. It's very different now.
Yeah. You don't have. I know you don't have really a benefit for donors to give, you know, just buttloads of money. But do you have people that step forward anyway, just because they care about what you're doing, and they just go, you know, here's some money. Go make some music with it. Or those people, you still got those people around, yeah.
Uh, yeah, I again, because Peter's not been keen to do
Yeah.
that, and Andrew Carwood similarly hasn't had time to do that.
Gotcha.
I haven't seen a lot of evidence of that.
Uh huh.
There are a few people with the Cardinals Music that are very generous and that organise trustees and dinners and things like that. And there's been a little bit of that, but with Tallis Scholars, there's been none of that.
Yeah.
And it's extremely rare that money is sort of just floods into the system. It's just not how it's worked.
Yeah.
And I think I'm weird that I've worked for groups that have not really done that. I know that other groups are much more on this, and that what you say is the situation, but I'm afraid I haven't really seen that.
Yeah.
I haven't seen it at St. Paul's. We don't get checks in the post saying your music's wonderful, have £100,000. I remember John Scott going to New York,
Mm-hmm.
and starting at St. Thomas's Fifth Avenue, having been at St. Paul's for 20 years, and him saying that on the first week that he was there, he received a check for his music program, which was more than he ever saw
Wow.
given in his entire time at St. Paul's.
Wow.
So I do think there's a slight difference in the experience of that.
I think this is a nut we'll have to crack. I think figuring out a way to to get your music out there. It's a good way for people to measure, your what you consider your final product. A polished product.
Yeah.
A lot of groups, including us, post, a lot of live stuff and a lot of
Yeah.
sort of unfinished. And I say that just to say CD produced quality
Yeah.
stuff, and people don't have to pay to listen to it. They can just click on it YouTube,
Yeah.
and always wonder if I'm competing with a version of myself all the time when I, when I post something like that.
I think you have to do that now. Yeah, I think that's completely part of it.
And I remember when video clips were pretty helpful in getting attention. Now those need to be super short and super interesting in order to get
Yeah,
attention. Yeah, I just wonder where the future of this goes. I mean, we're in a place. So we have a nonprofit system, and we have um, donors, and though most of our stuff is still ticket sales, and some
yeah,
some places in the middle of America, these Midwest choral institutions, they just have old money there that's ready for more available
ready.
for groups down there. But over on at least in Seattle, that's not quite how it's going. So it'll be
Mhm.
it's just a not yeah it'll be interesting to see how this all unfolds in the future.
It's constant. Yeah,
Um,
I'm gonna have to quit with
yeah.
this. Yeah.
Well, Patrick, we're approaching our 1 hour mark. Did you want to say anything else before we sign off? It was so great to see you, by the way, and
Oh, thank
in
you
London.
for
It was
coming.
such. I know you were flooded with fans, but we appreciate you spending time with us.
Well, that was certainly one of my Tallis Scholar highlights. That whole gig, that final gig that I did, and it was very much you lot being there made a huge difference to that.
Oh,
But I just had a really good selection of friends and supporters there, and it was a very spectacular moment for me. And I was so relieved to go out with my voice in working order, and I planned it a year in advance,
wow,
so but to pull it off was a huge relief to me, and I was very pleased that you were there.
good, good.
It was really good.
Yeah, it was our pleasure. You sounded fantastic, and Tallis Scholars did also as usual. Um, well,
Thank you.
thanks again, Patrick, and from your Seattle contingent fans. Um, we love you, and we're Patrick
You?
fans all the way.
Yeah. Keep following auroranova.com,
Yes,
auroranovachoir.com.
Aurora.
That's my website. That's my women's choir. And that's where you'll get sort of more news of what's going on new with Patrick Craig. I think that's the best place to
Perfect,
look
and
for
I'll
me.
have that linked, and
Yeah,
let's see.
I'll send you all
Yeah,
that.
and let us know if you guys manage to make it to Seattle.
Yeah, we'd love to.
Okay.
Definitely.
Okay, thanks so much, Patrick, and hopefully I'll see you again soon.
Thank you so
Okay,
much.
take care. Take care.
Talk to you. Bye.